Hi, my name is Olivia Gudaniec, and you're watching the Olivia G Show. And today we're going to talk about the art of negotiation. We're going to be joined by Fotini, who is a communication and conflict management specialist, and she's going to teach us negotiation skills.
I'm so excited. You look beautiful.
I washed my hair for you today.
Me too, because weekends, I just don't. I just want to relax. Tell us what you do, my friend.
That's a great question. I do a lot of stuff. I go from company to company helping them deal with high stakes negotiations. So when the large global retailers come breathing down their necks, I'm usually the one that they call. I also do a lot of keynoting, though that's changed these days. So I speak to people in conferences all over the place about confidence and resilience and getting what you want and communication and all of those fun things. I am finishing a book that is coming out next year, but generally my goal in life is to help people get what they want. And negotiation is one of those things that people don't know that it happens all around us all the time. And they don't realize when they're doing it either, which part of my job is to enlighten them and give them some tools on how to do that.
For sure. And the more I was like researching negotiation, I'm like, man, I did not go in prepared enough times for a bunch of important calls. And now I'm like, okay, we're going to get the tips from you. We're going to get the tips. Okay.
Yeah, it's a common oversight.
Yeah. So I constantly hear the art of negotiation, but what does the art of negotiation even mean? Is there an art to it?
I do think there is, because it's not, one of the things I talk about in my book is the fact that everybody assumes that, okay, well, I'm going to work out the numbers, I'm going to have an Excel spreadsheet ready, and then this is it, that's done. But people are not rational creatures, right? We are led and ruled by our emotions. So the art is understanding that. The art is being able to remove your emotions from this scenario, not let your ego take over and go, who am I dealing with right now? And what do I need to do in order to get the best possible situation out of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you think about negotiation versus persuasion versus manipulation, is that all intertwined?
It is. I would say persuasion is what we do before negotiation takes place. And if you've done it well, then you don't have to negotiate. Because negotiate is two people trying to reach an agreement. If you've already persuaded them, if you've done a great job, you don't have to get them to reach an agreement. Manipulation is something that I would say is the ethical conundrum when it comes to negotiation and persuasion in general. So I take comfort in knowing that the people that follow me, the people who, want to learn from me, are not people who are a manipulative bunch. And I think most of the time people can see through that. It may take some time to catch up, but I do think people see through that. So you could use the skills for the purpose of manipulation, but the true art of negotiation is really two people trying to reach an agreement. It's not two people trying to reach an agreement by lying to each other or taking advantage of one another. That's not the crux of the whole concept.
Yeah, and I think I used to think of negotiation as kind of like a conflict scenario, a scary thing, almost like a boxing ring. And I realized that that's my mindset. And again, the more research, the more I've been following you and your content and your lessons, the more I realize that it's just two people coming to an understanding. It doesn't have to be win or lose. But for a long time, that's how I thought it was. Someone's coming out here a winner, while the other is not going to be as happy.
So that's pretty common. I mean, I use the analogy of the boxing ring all the time, and I understand why. I understand why people feel that way, because there are some negotiations that truly are win-lose, but not all of them have to be. And I think most people go into the assumption, assuming that, oh, well, this is going to be impossible. They're going to beat me up. And they shy away from even having the negotiation because of that. And there are situations where it's win-lose. When it's about cash, it is win-lose, because whatever cash you take, I lose. Whatever cash I take, you lose. But when you said not happy, Well, that's where I think that we can change our mindset even in those win-lose scenarios, because it's about satisfaction. If you're not satisfied, then you probably won't agree to this deal, or after the deal is over, you'll give me a bad review, or you might change your mind, or something could happen. There are consequences. So again, if we go back to the manipulation thing, you don't want to be manipulative in a situation like that. Yes, you want to win as much money as you can, but you're not doing it to make the other person go bankrupt. You're doing it to the point where they are still satisfied to walk away. And there's some tricks as well in terms of how to do that. There's some thoughts around, what does their satisfaction look like? How do you give them that? There's some techniques to use for it, but it doesn't have to be so daunting, because I find those actual win-lose scenarios, if you want to call them that, the competitive negotiations, those are actually the simplest of all of them. The biggest hurdle to being successful in them is getting up the courage to actually attempt it in the first place. And know that most people also assume that those types of negotiations, when they're win-lose, when they're about money, that they're like this very combative, they're going to be rude to me, they're going to be mean to me, they're going to think I'm greedy. And that really, I kind of demystify some of that in the book, because I'm never rude. At least I try not to be. And I always find myself, I try to be as diplomatic as possible. And yet when I'm buying souvenirs on a beach in Mexico, or when I'm buying a new car, those are the win-lose scenarios. Someone's going to win more than the other. And yet none of us feels dissatisfied. None of us feels like, oh, that's a horrible person I never want to deal with again. So you can do it in a way that also aligns with your morals and ethics.
I love that. And I really try to go into negotiations these days by thinking about long-term, especially when dealing with entrepreneurs. Because like you said, maybe you'd want to work with them down the line, or they could leave you a bad review, or they could possibly mention your name in a room full of opportunities. You never know. So switching that mindset to think long-term has helped me. And I think that's something now I like to push to my audience. And I got that from you too. So thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear that. It's like the long-term mindset is one where you can find even new opportunities well beyond cash. Like if you're dealing with somebody, cash is going to be an element of the negotiation. You need to get paid. You need to pay your mortgage. But what else can they do for you that would put more cash in your pocket? And that's the more long-term creative side of negotiation.
For sure. So how can we create some good habits? What have you seen through amateur rookie negotiators that keep coming up? And how can we identify if we're doing that?
So I would say the biggest mistake I see people making is they talk too damn much. So the name of my book is actually called Say Less, Get More. And we chose it intentionally because what happens is people get really nervous when it comes to situations like negotiation, when it comes to something that's important to you, when it's conflict, when it's stress. You get really nervous and your brain goes into overdrive, right? It's that fight or flight mode kicking in back from our, ancestors, the cave women and cavemen that were out there. So what happens is when all of that rational thought leaves your brain to go to your limbs to allow you to run like hell away from whatever threat that you were facing, that's when you also find today, even though we're not faced with the saber-toothed tigers of the past, your palms get really sweaty, your heart starts to race a little bit more. These are the things that happen when we're stressed. And so what happens is all that rational thought's left your brain, it's gone to make that heart race. And now you start filling in the silence and talking and talking and talking, and you're actually giving away information. You're preventing them from giving you information. You're preventing each other from solving a problem in the first place. And so I tell people to hit their mental pause button and go, okay, take a calm breath, take a meditative breath, visualize yourself in your happy place, whatever it takes, but take that moment to allow the rational thought to come back in. And when I'm at live events, I give out this card. I don't know if you can, there you go.
Yeah,
you can see it.
I love that.
So I give out these little pause buttons because it's like, using this to press your pause button. And I get messages from people all the time going, I have pause buttons all over my house and in my wallet and on my computer or whatever.
It's such a little thing you can do, but it makes such a difference. But I think then that's when people put pressure on themselves to just keep going because they don't want to sound weak by just taking that extra moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of my students wrote in her paper, because I teach MBA students, and one of them wrote in her paper, I thought I was going to look weak if I said nothing. What they found was when you sit there and you look confident, maybe you're looking pensive, but it's a matter of, am I looking like this and am I looking like I'm scared? Or am I sitting there going, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to own this moment, or I'm going to even say, I need a minute to think about that. You know, that confidence that you exude when you're doing that, when you're owning that pause, can be far more impactful than anything that's going to come out of your mouth. And I think it's so important to recognize that saying nothing is actually something sometimes way more effective and way more confident looking. It's actually a much stronger response than, you know, trying to fill that gap.
I guess when I just look back on my life, the people that really stand out are the people that are sharp and that always come out with, you know, like that quick response. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, it'll come like 10 minutes after. I'm like, oh, I should have said that and I didn't. And that's why I even put that pressure on myself. Like, say something and hopefully the right thing will come out, but that could actually bite you in the butt.
Well, the reason the people that you admire are so quick is because they're going in there with confidence, right? So they don't have that rational thought leaving their brain. They're able to think clearly because they go, I got this. You know, their pause button is accessed in the recesses of their brain at all times. So people are always like, how do you come up with that right on the spot? And it's like, because I have a lot of practice. I know my stuff really well. I've been practicing negotiation every single day for over a decade in my work as well as my personal life. So I have an opportunity to have, you know, it's like muscle memory in a sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why the people that you admire are good at it, because they have experience doing that, or they have confidence doing it. If you're going in there, I have to say something, you're actually preventing yourself from saying something and being so sharp and quick and all of those things. So I think you need to just take a moment to calm yourself down. If it takes you 2 seconds longer than the person that you admire, ain't nothing wrong with that. So it's just about, you know, training yourself to be better at those pauses, and maybe the pauses will become faster and faster.
Absolutely. Like with anything, practice, I don't want to say makes perfect, but gets the ball rolling. And it's funny because I actually asked one of the girls once, like, how are you so quick? And she said it in the same way as you kind of said it. She's like, I have been asked similar questions so many times that now I have these automatic responses, but I just happened to hear it for the first time. So I took it as, whoa, like this person is sharp and on it. Anyways, how can we find confidence in conflict?
I think, well, it's a great question. I think it is about, like I said, taking the calming breath and going, okay, why are you here? If you know what your objective is, whether it is, hey, I want to keep peace with this person, or I want to get money from this person, or whatever it is, take a pause and think about what is your objective here. And then I would say, turn the tables around. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. What are they thinking? What do they feel fearful of? What is driving this behavior? And that'll take you almost like a distraction from your own fears, and have you focusing on theirs will actually build a little bit more confidence, because what you're doing is you're acquiring knowledge, and knowledge is powerful. So if you could go, I know what Olivia is thinking. Oh, I know why she's so nervous right now. I'm not thinking about my nervousness anymore, right? I go, I think Olivia is going to say this and this, so I know how to prepare for that conversation. Those are the things that are going to help to build up some of that momentum when you go in. Of course, if you know you're going into a negotiation, if you know you're going into conflict, there's lots of things I can tell you about preparing. But the moment you find yourself in conflict and you weren't prepared for that, that's where I'd say press pause and flip the script a little bit. Think about it from their perspective. And I think that'll give you a lot more confidence and a lot more clarity about what are the next great steps that you can take to resolve it.
For sure, I agree. And one of the lessons you had in your 40 to 40 was kind of flipping the script on them and asking them, what can you do for me? So if you're like in that moment where you just like don't know what to say, just having that question there, I find would be so helpful, would give you that time to A, gather more information, and B, just be able to, again, hit pause, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like I tell people all the time when I'm in my talks or when I'm in consulting with corporate clients, we kind of have like a go-to list of questions at the ready. And I suspect, well, if we go back to what you said earlier about the people that you admire, they have a go-to list, whether it's a go-to list of comments, a go-to list of questions, and so on. It's about going, how can I use this question that I'm used to using? Because they're generic questions. What is the best way to go about this? How do you think we can work together on this? Just having that generic question ready, it takes the pressure off you. And using questions is another way to access your pause button, because now your brain's getting a break. They're the ones that are about to do all the talking, and they're about to give you lots of information.
Yeah, and when I was, I've been watching a lot of, I think his name is Chris Voss. He's a hostage negotiator.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about just rewording the questions too. So instead of using I, which is a thought interrupter, instead of me being like, I think this is my point, kind of just flipping the script in the sense that it seems that you are uncomfortable with blank. It seems that you have a problem with my hair. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So just, do you think, how do you feel about that?
I would agree with him. I frame it a little bit. I frame it a little bit differently. So anytime I tell my clients, people don't want to hear your opinion. They don't want to hear, I think this. The second you say the words, I think, they're going to mirror that behavior and they're going to go, I think this. And now you're arguing, right? You're butting heads. How can you make it more objective? When it's opinion, when it's I think, that's subjective. This is from my perspective and my perspective only. I feel like if you could watch this as an outsider, if you could have a third party watching it, what would the third party say? The third party would say, it seems that, instead of, I think you did this. Pointing fingers is really never going to get you very far. But what would a third party say to this? It seems that the market rates are, not, I think I should get paid this. The market rates are this. They can't dispute the third party or the objective information, but they can certainly dispute your opinion, and they're going to. And so I think that objectivity takes the edge off of whatever's going to come out of your mouth, and it makes them less defensive. Because the second you say, I think, it's like, I'm going to poke you and poke you and poke you. And what do you think you're going to do? You're going to get defensive, and you're going to go, well, I think this, because now you're just provoking my ego. It's poking the bear. So I think of it as that third party. What would the outsider looking in say? And that makes it a little bit easier for them to swallow.
I wish I just looked into this a little more before having conversations, especially with my boyfriend. It would just help things out so much. And I totally agree with what Natasha's saying, that she's actually used this strategy to negotiate with her boyfriend. And we have to also keep in mind that each conversation, each negotiation, each deal is a different beast in itself. Because, for instance, with my boyfriend, he is somebody that wants to finish his sentence. There's no interrupting. So I kind of have to mirror that behavior in order to get through a conversation, especially when I guess the stakes are high. Whereas when I have a negotiation with my sister, we interrupt each other all the time, and we're okay with that, and we can get through the deal in a different way. So everybody's so different. So not only do you have to express what you want to say, you kind of have to, I guess, feel who you're talking to and how that interaction is going to go. So there's so many levels to it. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. For me, my brain is practice. It's too overactive, but I'm going to. But
I mean, look at what you've learned in the last little while, right? However long it's been since you read or watched Christopher Voss or started paying attention to my feed or whatever it is. You've absorbed a ton, right? And your brain's racing, like, how do I apply all this stuff?
Yes.
I've been doing it for over a decade. I've actually been doing it since I was 6. Like, my parents remember and tell stories about me negotiating with them.
I love
that. When you talk about, your boyfriend being different than your sister, that's what I mentioned earlier about flip the script, right? What is it looking like from their perspective? Your boyfriend has a shorter fuse for interrupting. Your sister doesn't. So what is it that they need? And it's like, I find that there's a lot of overlap between leadership and negotiation, because leaders know it's not about how I want to speak. It's how people want to be spoken to. And so there's an element.
We got to say that again. I love that. Say that.
It's not how I want to speak. It's how people want to be spoken to. Because I could be speaking in Chinese. I could be speaking in Greek. I could be doing all those things. No one's going to listen to me because they're not going to understand it. I need to speak in their language, right? So I'm going to speak English to my English audience. And it's the same is true when you're talking about negotiation, when you're talking about leadership, when you're trying to get somebody to follow your ideas, because that's what leadership is getting people to follow you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to do that, you've got to think about it from their perspective. Because if you try to shove something down their throats, they're going to resist you. If you try to interrupt them when they don't want to be interrupting, they're going to turn you off. They're going to discount everything that comes out of your brain. So it's about thinking about who is this person on the other side of things. It's even like when you write an email. You know, if you like to write long prose in your email and you're writing paragraphs and paragraphs, and the person who's receiving the email goes, oh God, I just wanted bullet points, right? What is the happy medium between the two to make sure they're actually going to want to read it? Because they might look at it and go, that's too long for me. I'll get back to it later. And now you're not getting a response at all. So it's about thinking about the things from the other person's perspective. And again, that's your pause button moment. That's your chance to be a little bit more confident and collect some knowledge and take the pressure off your thoughts and fears and put your emphasis on their thoughts and their fears as well.
It's interesting because when you were talking about that, it kind of sounds like pitching. I've been talking a lot about public relations over the past month and about pitching with bullet points rather than presenting your whole story right up front. So that, I don't know, I just kind of saw that similarity. Do you see a connection between pitching and negotiation?
Absolutely. I actually read a ton of books. I read less books now specifically on negotiation, and I read more books around psychology. You know, things like Pitch Anything. I can't remember some of the other ones, like persuasion books around the art of pre-suite. There's a lot of them out there. In fact, I was just making a list last night. I was working on my book last night, so you can see my ridiculous wall of Post-its. But there's at least a dozen books that I reference in my own book, and most of them are actually around psychology. And so, you know, when I talked earlier about persuasion is kind of the beginning part of negotiation. If you've done it really effectively, you're going to make the negotiation part much easier or unnecessary altogether. It's almost like, what can I do to remove some of the obstacles in the negotiation process? It's getting them engaged. It's getting them wanting to work with you up front. That's what persuasion is all about. And pitching is really the same thing. It's how can I minimize some of their objectives? How can I get them engaged in a way where they want to work with me? Maybe I need to build trust in 30 seconds. Trust is something that's required in negotiation too. So the overlap there is huge. And that's why I think it's so important. And that's why, you know, for me, my focus is reading more and more about psychology, because as I said, it's about flipping the script and going, what are things looking like from their perspective? The more I understand psychology and their psychology specifically, the easier it is for me to formulate a plan to get inside their heads. Because that's all negotiation is. It's psychology, it's emotion. If it was a rational thing, then I wouldn't need the psychology books. If it was a rational thing, it could all be done via computers. You'd plug your numbers in, you'd plug your brainstorming, you know, issues in, and somebody else would spit it out. The reason why that's not happening, I think Facebook did a trial or a test a couple of years ago. The reason it's not happening though is because the bots don't understand emotion. AI can't understand emotion as well as humans do. So they can't predict all the crazy things that we say and do. But the study of psychology will help us we'll get there a lot faster.
Yeah, and we constantly, especially in the business world, we're always hearing that people buy through emotion and through feeling. So
yeah, absolutely.
So my next question would be, how can somebody negotiate with you? Do you kind of establish the way you want to be negotiated with? Does that kind of make sense?
It does make sense. We talk about anchoring. That's a term in negotiation. And anchoring is who goes first. You could anchor by, you know, making the first offer and making, you know, if I go to the car dealership, I can put my number down before they have a chance to put theirs down. But you can also anchor the type and style of the negotiation. So even with my clients, sometimes I know I am way out of their price range. You know, there's no way they're ever going to be able to afford me, but there's a reason why I want to work with them. There's some value with them. So I tell them, you know, I'm open to value propositions. I'd love to know what you think you can provide in terms of value. That's how I signal to them to go, she's not doing this competitive thing right now. She's over in the collaborative zone of the spectrum. She wants to try and find a way to work with us. Let's get creative. That's a signal for a creative and collaborative negotiation versus this one. If I'm going to go, the price is this, that's it. Then I've now said, these are my terms. This is the ring that we're going to be stepping into. And here's how we're going to handle things right now. So there's definitely lots of ways how you could, you know, signal that this is how I want to work. Typically, I tell my clients, you know, I try to be more collaborative than competitive. I think there's lots of ways to create value. I have to pay my bills, But so I have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, there are many ways where we can find ways to work together. So for example, there was a group last year who wanted me to do a keynote for them, and they didn't have half the budget that they needed to in order to get me there. But I was like, okay, here's what's valuable to me. I can't do something in the middle of the week for you because that's going to block me from booking all these other clients who are going to be paying full price. But I do know that Friday afternoons, no one's booking stuff. So if you want to do something on a Friday afternoon, my calendar will definitely be empty, and that's an opportunity for us to work together. And, you know, I'm looking for people for new audiences and new exposure and all that kind of stuff. And they had like a magazine that they were doing, and they had recommended me to like 3 other groups and so on. So there was lots of ways for me to get value without, you know, cutting out the value, without hurting my own business by working with them. And they went, we can be totally flexible, whatever day you want, whatever time you want. And so we found a way to make it work, right? Yeah. All because we were getting creative about it.
And that's an excellent example of a win-win scenario, and not, you know, you're losing or they're losing. And it's more balanced because, yeah, it's creativity is coming into play. And if you guys are feeling like a lack of confidence going into negotiation, I always just like take it back a second. And I think if somebody is having you in the room with them, they obviously see value in having a conversation with you. So that should bring confidence in to at least some percent.
That is so huge, what you just said. And I'm so glad you came to that conclusion on your own, because I think so many people overlook that. Why are you here? Why are they talking to you right now? People, you know, in this day and age, time is our most important commodity, right? We don't give it away easily. So there's a reason why people will give you their time, because you have something that they need or something they think they can make use of. So if you can tap into that and go, I'm bringing something to the table, otherwise it wouldn't be giving me the time of day. That should be a little mini confidence boost in that moment for you, for sure.
So what about when there's 3 or more people involved in a negotiation? Do the same tactics still apply? Do you still get the same results using, let's say, your principles techniques, or does it become more complicated because now it's multiple personalities?
It becomes more complicated because it's like if you were juggling with just 2 balls, it'd be easier. Now you have a third in there. So yeah, it becomes a little bit more difficult because there's one more person to pay attention to. There's one more person whose needs need to be met, and so on. If it's somebody that you're working with, let's say you're bringing in an assistant or a partner into this meeting. So that's why there's 3 people. You two need to have a negotiation on the same side of the table to go, who's going to do the talking and when, so that you're not interrupting each other or contradicting each other, that you're on the same page when you go in. So you can do some of that work in advance, but you're still going to be mindful of the person next to you. So it's still that little element to juggle. If you have 2 people across from you and you're now negotiating with 2 people, you're also now paying attention. That extra thing that you're juggling is, are their reactions consistent? Is this person smiling when that person's frowning? And that's when you can kind of sort of see the manipulation at play as well, because if they're not on the same page, something's up, right? So, and it's also making sure that neither one of them feels ignored, because I've been in a room before where I was, I actually tell this story in the book. I was an interviewer. There was 4 of us who were interviewing a new candidate in this company I used to work for. I was the youngest by far, and I was the only female. Okay, so I'm sitting next to the CEO and 2 other senior guys across from me, and this other guy sitting at the end, this candidate is sitting at the end of the table. It's very easy for this gentleman to assume that I'm the CEO's assistant or something like that. He paid 0 attention to me. He made no eye contact with me. He didn't try to engage with me in any way. He was focusing heavy on the 2 most senior guys in the room. I got nothing. And so when it came time for him to ask a certain question, the CEO turned to me and went, well, Fotini's really the best one to answer that. And you could see the oh shit moment on his face, right? Because he had let one of those balls drop. So you really need to pay attention to every single person in that room. Maybe focus more of your energy on obviously the person who's speaking versus the one who's sitting there taking notes. But you want to be paying attention to, what are their reactions like? Do I need to engage them in conversation? You know, is this person derailing the conversation right now? So it does get more complex because there's just more things to juggle, but it doesn't change the principles at play.
So I think 2 important things came out of that while you were speaking. Number 1 is to do your research. If you're going into a high stakes meeting, especially, maybe just a quick Google search to see who's coming in. Maybe that will be there, maybe it won't, but just taking that extra step. What was the other one? it'll come back to me. It'll come back to me.
Well, for me, it's engaging everybody. I think you're right about Googling. Like, if you have the opportunity to find something out about somebody, like I said before, knowledge is power, right? But whether I was the secretary or, you know, the head of consulting or the director of sales or whatever, it shouldn't matter. You should be respecting everybody in that room. And that's what that's where the ball dropped for this particular individual. So it's about just being mindful of every single person who's there. And the other thing that we talked about was who's sitting with you. You know, what preparation can you two do to get aligned and make sure that you're on the same page?
Yeah, that's the second point. Yeah, just taking that 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever you need to do. If you're going in with somebody being like, yes, I'm going to be the one doing the talking, make sure you're on the same page so you're not fighting each other for attention while in that negotiation too, which could add just another layer of conflict and derailing the conversation. So I love that. Can you imagine if you went in with, you know, your business partner or something like that, and your business partner's going, oh yeah, we can totally do that. And you're like, no, no, we can't. Or they start sharing all sorts of information about how much time you have available in your calendar. You're like, we're trying to make it look like we're super busy and popular here. So there's, you know, there's all of these things that you want to make sure that you're on the same page about before you go in. So it's like having a little contract with your peer as well as working on the contract across the table. Yeah, and even if you guys think you're on the same page, just have that extra 5 minutes, even if you think you're on the same page, because, yeah, it's your reputation at stake to some extent. Yeah.
With my clients and even with my MBA students, we do role plays. Like, we assign roles and go, I'm going to be the speaker. I'm going to be the note taker. I'm the one who's going to start the meeting, and then I'm going to pass the baton to you. And people stick to those roles so that there isn't any of that stepping on each other's toes. And if the person is going to be the speaker in the meeting, you know, they're clearing with you, here are the things that I'm going to talk about. When we get a question about this, here's what we're going to ask. Here's how we're going to answer. If I don't know the answer, here's what I'm going to do. You know, you can prepare so much of that because so much of it is so predictable.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I started interviewing like on a consistent basis, it's been 5 years, but in the beginning I would role play with myself in an extent. So I'd be like, hey, Fotini, how's your day? And then I'd pretend to be you. Oh, great. You know, I just woke up and I'm going to be giving a keynote speech in the next hour. So I've got lots going on. And then I would just talk to myself, and that just made me feel more comfortable. B, it kind of gave me ideas on what extra topics or points that I could hit. And that's something I tell a lot of my clients as well, that role play, well, first of all, with yourself is crucial. But if you can get it with, let's say, a friend, or I use my sister a lot because she's a phone call away, how she responds and her tone is completely different to how I would imagine it too, which throws me off, which gets me more prepared for the interview, because now I have two angles that I could possibly I prepare for. And now at this point, I don't need to role play as much because I'm more comfortable with it, but that's just with practice.
Absolutely. That's all it is, right? So, you know, when my clients are going to a high stakes scenario, I'll fly in the night before a really big meeting with them if they're going to go in to go see Walmart or Costco or Air Canada or whatever it is. And we'll spend most of that time pretending, how do we think this meeting's going to go?
Yeah, I love
and
that.
I'll play the role of, you know, the other person on the other side of the table, and I'll challenge them and I'll push them so that afterwards, when we have a follow-up and I go, how did it go? They're like, oh my God, it's exactly what we expected. When they said this, we were ready with that. When they said that, we were ready with this. And it's muscle memory, right? Instead of being in the moment and going, what do I say now? Because I didn't spend time anticipating this kind of stuff. I think that's a wonderful thing. And so because you've done that so much with your sister or others, now you go, okay, I know how to handle a moment when I get a question that I'm not expecting. I know how to handle a moment when they say something about their day. It's a simple thing that you can do to help yourself.
Yeah, and I love the muscle memory fact, because it's so true. I've had guests who answer with one word, and I've had guests where they just take over the conversation. And I've been in that situation enough times to know how to navigate that. But in the beginning, if somebody just overpowered me, I let it happen because I didn't know. And that, again, just comes with practice. But now you mentioned high stakes, and I really want to talk about when those high stakes come up, emotions come up for a lot of people. In specific, I want to just talk about, let's say somebody, high stakes at work, high stakes in a courtroom. it's not the best place to break down or lose composure. First, how do we navigate that? What are your initial thoughts on when emotions come into play in negotiation?
So for me, it comes back to that pause button. Everybody's going to have different coping mechanisms. And so you need to work on one that's going to be most effective for you. So, with some people it's visualization, with some people it's breathing, with some people it's recalling something. So for example, there was a study done or some research around NFL players and basketball players and stuff like that. And they found that when they recalled a previous victory, it helped them get in the mindset to be more effective on the court, right? So at halftime, when they're in the locker room or whatever it is, the coach isn't just berating them. He's going, we can do this. Remember when we did it way back here? And that's a really great way to do that, to handle that type of thing. So that's one of their coping mechanisms. And I recommend it for clients as well. When's the last time you handled, if you're going into court, think about the last time you handled it really well, the last time you won, and what did that feel like? They're going to walk a little taller. They're going to have a little bit more confidence. When things start to sink and the energy gets low, it's again, recalling that moment. Look, I can handle this. I've got this. I've done it before. You can give yourself a little mental pep talk inside your brain. Or maybe it is the visualizing your pause button. Maybe it is this meditative breath that you've been practicing for so long. Studies also show us that if you're somebody who does yoga and Pilates, I'm a huge Pilates junkie, the 1 hour that you spend doing that exercise, you feel much better after it, right? Because you've just spent an hour breathing and moving and stretching and all that kind of stuff. That has a halo effect for 24 hours. So
I did not know
if
that.
you know, yeah. And so if you know you're going to go into something like that, what can you do to prevent? What can you do to minimize some of that? Even little things like hydrating properly. I also know if I have sugar tomorrow morning, I'm going to have brain fog. If I need to be at my sharpest, I'm going to be thinking about little physiological things that we can do that would help our body perform more optimally, right? So it's thinking about some of those things that you can do to give yourself a little boost. Another thing that comes up a lot, and here's a great book recommendation for you. Presence is a book by Dr. Amy Cuddy, and she talks about power poses. So her TED Talk about how your body language shapes who you are, that one is one of the most popular TED Talks in the world. And so she talks about power poses like the Wonder Woman, the Victor, the thing you want to do as soon as you cross the finish line.
Yes.
The Villain is the one where you put your hands on a desk or something like that and lean forward. Or no, the Villain is this one. The Villain is like put your hands behind your head and feet up on a desk. The CEO is the one where Donald Trump likes, he's leaning on a podium and all that kind of stuff. All of those things. And the one that is most popular, if you've ever spent time on public transit, is the man spread. And so each one of those things are poses that take up physically more space. And so when you're doing that, when you're physically taking up more space, you are looking more confident to the other party, right? So they don't see you as meek or weak, and they react accordingly. And you're also making sure that you are sending your brain a signal that you are feeling more confident as well. So it's a double fold, right? You get a double benefit out of it. So send them a message, send your brain a message by physically taking up more space as well. There was another one that I read in a study, and this one's in the book, I think, as well. So they told people to say right before, actually the study was, they had people sing the song, a Journey song, the one that was on Glee, I can't remember, Don't Stop Believin', I think that was it. So they had, yeah. So they had these people do the song, but right before it, half the group was told to say, I'm excited about singing. The other half was told, I'm nervous about singing. So then they had the group that said, I'm excited, performed the song better, maybe they were louder or whatever. But then they were given math tests and they were given other tasks. And the ones who said, I'm excited, performed better on the other tasks, the one that had nothing to do with the song. And so that means that you can actually psych yourself up by telling yourself, instead of saying, I'm so nervous about getting on stage, it's, I'm so excited to share what I have to share with people. Instead of, I'm worried about this, litigation that I'm going to go into about being in the courtroom or whatever it is. I'm so excited to finally put my skills to use. I'm nervous about what this client is going to think of me. I'm excited to show them what I'm made of. You can change things dramatically and actually improve your performance by psyching yourself up like that. It's pressing your pause button to go, how do I reframe this for myself? How do I get excited about it instead of getting scared by it? And that, again, is a muscle memory thing. It's about practicing and making this something that you're going to do. Maybe you start doing it before the meeting every single time, and you'll get better at doing it during the meeting when things start to take a little bit of a dip. But you can be your own worst enemy, or you can be your own savior. And it's just how you want to handle those little tips and tricks.
Yeah, there were so many good nuggets in there. And I'm going to be making sure that I try to get all those book recommendations down in the description once this turns into a replay after. I want to just briefly share, I guess, a personal story. So I had a bunch of issues with my house, and there wasn't flooding, but like water damage. And so I knew I had the power because it was happening, but the builder was like, it's nothing. They painted over it. I came back. It's something. It's nothing. Next thing I know, the inspector comes. It is something, but it's really on the low scale of it. Like, no, it's something. Next thing you know, I'm in a hotel for a couple of weeks because you can't even live here. So the nothing turned into something. And it just kept going back and forth. And it was extremely emotionally draining because high stakes were involved, because this is my home and I'm spending just as much money as my neighbor, and I'm not even living in here right now. And then it came to a point where they would come to my door and they were saying I'm being uncooperative because I'm demanding it to be fixed. And at one point, I broke down. So I don't want to say did I lose. How could I have, I don't know, navigated that differently? How can we, when it's our home or something so precious to us, just keep it together, if that's even us putting more pressure on ourselves?
Look, the closer you are to it, right, and the more, dear it is to you, the more difficult it is going to be to hold it together, right? It's the reason why we can be super polite to strangers, but we're rarely as polite to the people that we're closest to, because you lose that element of control, that self-control, the closer you are to those people, or the closer you are to those issues. That's why it's super easy for me as a consultant to come in and tell people, you need to do this, 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 and this. And they're like, wait, what?
Yeah,
because they get they're in it, right? You're swirling, you're circling the drain kind of thing. Whereas I can go, oh, here we go. Let me pull you out of it because I'm watching it from the outside. So it's much easier for me to do. I will say that maybe it wasn't so terrible that you did break down. Maybe that was the moment they needed to see, oh, we need to take this seriously because, obviously this is affecting this woman so much. So even though I'm not a huge fan of crying in the workplace, it's happened to me before. And because I had reached my breaking point, and that was the moment my then boss went, oh, I need to take her seriously because she's been talking about this for a long time. And if she's breaking down about this, then obviously this has not been resolved. And this is a big issue. We had a lot of big issues in that office. But I would say that one of the things that you could be doing is having those, I think the questions that I mentioned earlier, those would be really useful in that moment. So one of the ways to manage conflict is by asking questions, especially for women, because we can all very easily be perceived as aggressive instead of assertive, right? So if you want to make that shift from aggressive to assertive, then asking, instead of telling somebody, you need to do this, what do you think would happen if we didn't do this? So it's almost like you're going to get to the same place, but you're using an indirect route to get there. You're kind of coaxing them to come along with you instead of pushing them to go. They're going to resist you if you're pushing them.
Yeah,
but if you're coaxing them, they're going to come along with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so if you could think of questions, again, it's like a Rolodex of here's a list of questions I always have at the ready. What do you think is going to happen if we don't fix this? What happens in 5 years from now if it's not done? How are you going to handle it when this happens and I come to you and I say you need to cover it? All of those questions that you could have ready. If everything that comes out of your mouth is in the form of a question, then it's going to be a lot easier to push them into problem solving mode and get them to be more accountable to it versus you forcing it on them. I use child analogies all the time in my work. So I could tell my nieces, you need to eat your vegetables, and they're going to whine and complain. But I could say, which vegetable do you like better, broccoli or cauliflower? And now all of a sudden they feel like they have some autonomy in it. They feel like they own it. And so they're actually going to be more, they're not going to even think about resisting me on the vegetables. They're going to actually, now got them focused on which vegetable, right? We're now in the vegetable zone. So if you're asking your contractors or your builders or whomever it is, and you go, okay, so you don't want to do it. I understand. What happens when or if it such and such happens? How are you going to compensate me when this, instead of, you're going to have to compensate me. How are you going to compensate
Yes.
me? What process do we need to take in order to make that happen? And it's easier said than done, because when you are super emotional, that's very hard to do. But it's flipping that switch again. Like, you know, it's flipping the script to go, what do they need to hear right now? They need it in the form of a question instead of a demand. And that will also take some of the emotion out of it for you as well. It's like you'll become that person who's watching it from the outside. I can tell you from personal experience that it's difficult, but I can also tell you that I have been in some really awful situations that ended up in litigation down the road. And I found that I could find my pause button in that moment. I started going, if I had an out-of-body experience, what would this look like? How would somebody evaluate this? And then I went, no, this is how I'm handling it. I am not giving them that power. I'm not giving them the power to call me emotional. And when someone does call me emotional, I go, thank you. Thank you for recognizing my passion. It's my passion that gets things done around here, right? You're flipping it, you're reframing it. But I'm not going to give them that power to call me emotional or irrational or any of the connotations that go along with that. I'm going to say less and get more. I'm going to pause and take a deep breath. And then I'm going to go, okay, what's the question that I need to ask? What is the statement that I need to make right now? How much less can I possibly say? Because I know once I started, it's going to be really hard to reel it back in, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, pinch yourself, bite your tongue, whatever you have to do to stop yourself in that moment and give yourself a break to take your mental pause.
And I recently watched a TED Talk where somebody kind of gave the analogy of a remote. So if you're in a conversation, negotiation, deal, whatever you want to call it, you're not giving them the remote, being able to mute you or put your emotions higher. You take that bag, you're in control, and maybe just even seeing that as an analogy in your head might be able to help you navigate things a little better.
Absolutely.
That's a tactic I've definitely tried, and it's helped. I mean, it's baby steps. I'm not going to be like, you know, off the bat, but any little tip or tactic or tangible action I can take. Somebody else told me when she gets in high pressure scenarios, she takes a moment to pause, but instead of thinking about how she's going to answer or react, she just starts thinking, okay, red car, red. She just starts pointing out different things, and that helps her focus, which I thought was quite interesting. Have you heard of something like that?
I have. I had a client who told me, she's like, I talk with my hands a lot and I get really emotional. And when I do this, I start to get even more passionate. So she would take a marker and she would put all her energy into trying to break something that wouldn't break easily. And she'd put all her energy into trying to break it. And so that kind of channeled some of that. She could take out that aggression versus having the aggression come out of her mouth or her hands in that moment. So whether it's your pause button, whether it's visualizing the remote, whether it's visualizing a marker or whatever you need to hang on to, everyone's going to have those little coping things, and whichever one sticks, keep using that, lay into it, and keep, you know, tapping into it whenever you have to.
And if anybody here has some amazing tips, tricks too, like, we want to hear about it too, whether it's now or you're watching the replay. I'm just personally all about learning and growing. And if you guys are enjoying this, hit the subscribe button, like this video, follow along. Let's get into the questions, because Instagram does cut us off at the 1 hour mark, and I have them written down just to save us time without me having to go through them. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Fire away.
All right. Number 1, is the most confident person the one that always wins?
Not necessarily. I do think they have an advantage, but I would say the most prepared person is the one that always wins. And that confident person is probably confident because they prepared. But you could be all the, you know, have all the confidence in the world and walk in and go, listen to me, I'm confident. But if you've got no substance, you're not going anywhere. You're going to lose that confidence real fast.
Amazing. Okay, next question. Do you think men and women need to adopt different strategies? How can we become more effective negotiators?
So this one's a bit of a complex one. And I use the analogy of the stairs versus the on-ramp. And so I was trained by men, white, tall men. And what worked for them was not working for me. And I learned the same from watching my dad. If I mimicked my dad, things were not being received the same way when they were coming out of my mouth. So when I teach people, I try to teach to the lowest common denominator, right? The weakest one in society, if you will. Minorities, women especially, are those people. But if we can work with those people, they're like the on-ramp. Everything I tell people is going to work for everyone. The majority of people can use the stairs, but that's for the privileged class. The rest of us, if you're not privileged, it's going to be really hard to get up those stairs. But the privileged people can use the on-ramp as well. So I would say that I teach techniques that are a little bit more collaborative, but you can still be, like I said, firm without being rude. And rude might be acceptable. People won't like it, but it's almost tolerated. I think that's a better word.
Yeah.
When it comes from white men than it is from anybody else. We'll excuse it. We excuse a lot of things for the privileged class. We don't excuse it for everybody else. So I'm not suggesting women have to be different. I feel like everybody should be doing what I'm teaching women to do because it works for everybody and it creates much better conversations. So there are some slight differences because you can get away with it as a white privileged male, but I don't think you're going to be able to get away with it for long. So even when I read Chris Voss's book, the FBI hostage negotiator, I would say I agree with 80% of it. There's a few things in there that I go, that would never work for me. And I know that from personal experience. And so there's a few little elements there that I'd say, you know, I try to go the neutral route, the on-ramp versus stuff that will work for some, but not for all.
So like with anything, guys, you take what resonates with you, apply it to your life, and what doesn't, let it go. I don't know why I'm breaking out into song today. Okay, next question. If your boss keeps saying, well, that's the budget and won't move, what can you say?
When will it move? How can we move it? What's keeping it from moving? I would have lots of questions ready with that one.
Beautiful. All right. If you work part-time at a company as an employee and now they want you to do a project as a freelancer, do you have to accept your part-time hourly rate?
No. You don't have to do anything. Yeah. I would say the way to get it, the question should be, how do you go about changing it? Because there's a different set of circumstances. You agreed to do things part-time because there's some benefits to doing things part-time. If you want me to go all in as a freelancer, or you want me to do this as a freelancer, that's a different set of circumstances as well. So a different stress level, a different pace, all of that kind of stuff. So what you could say is, well, based on what freelancers get paid for this, again, it's like a third party saying something like this. It's not your opinion. Based on what a freelancer would get paid, here's the appropriate amount. Since it's not the same as part-time work, it is it's a more involved working scenario. I would say reframe it for them.
And I would just add to that, if you can also get it in writing. So when you follow up, maybe with an email, when you've asked for a certain X dollars, maybe just have that in confirmation so it can't switch back down the line.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
From my personal experience, everything in writing, guys, everything in 100%. Writing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, when the stakes start moving and people, yeah. Okay, next question. How can we move the needle today and increase our odds a little bit more at a time? I'm guessing with negotiation.
I would say it's practice. So start practicing everywhere you go, whether you're going to, you know, go and practice stuff that's low stakes. Get on the phone with your telecom provider. Negotiate with kids. Spend time around children. That is the easiest way. If you spend time around kids, they negotiate every freaking day, every hour of the day. They're doing it all the time. Pay attention to them and try to practice negotiating with them because they're doing it whether you recognize it or not. And of course, there's other things that you can do, like, you know, read books, watch videos. There's lots of stuff out there. And the more familiar you become with it, the more it's implanted on your brain, the more you're going to start to recognize, oh, that's a negotiation opportunity. And that's one as well. So you just have to keep the dialogue going. You got to stay in practice.
And I love the fact that you mentioned kids, because what I did for a series on my YouTube channel is I actually interviewed kids, to help me stay sharp, because you just never know what's going to come out of their mouths. Yeah. And that whole experience was so fulfilling and so fun and so funny and so random. So 100% negotiate with kids. That's a great way to practice. It's helped my interview skills. And if you guys want to watch that series, it's oliviag.tv/kids, just if you want to laugh. Okay, we have 2 more questions. And if anybody here has a question, we will answer it because you're here live, so I'm giving priority. But if not, everyone that's submitted over the last 48 hours, I'm just tackling those. Okay, next. How do I negotiate with someone I don't like or vibe well with?
I do it all the time. How do you negotiate well with them? You know, put it into perspective for yourself. It's not about them, it's about you. What do you want to get out of this? They're just a conduit for you to get what you want. So if you can reframe it for yourself, that's all you really have to do. You can be polite without being rude. You can ask questions. You don't have to be ready to go on vacation with these people. You don't have to be best friends with them and go hang out at the bar with them. You know, my clients are not people, well, actually, I actually become friends with a lot of my clients, but generally speaking, I'm not assuming we're going to be best friends for forever. And so you have to deal with people you don't like all the time. It's about making sure you've got your pause button at the ready. So have questions prepared. Understand what you're going to do when they push your buttons, you know, when they're trying to take the remote for you. Have strategies ready, coping mechanisms ready for when you're in those situations that are bothering you. But for the most part, it doesn't matter if you like them or not. Just be prepared. Know what you want to say, know what you want to go after, and anticipate some of the stupid things that might come out of their mouths. You know, I used to do a lot of work down in Texas, which is like the oil and gas you know, south in the US. It's like a whole other country down there sometimes. They're not used to women down there. They're certainly not used to women who are a lot younger than them. And they're certainly not used to women who have a funny name that they can't even pronounce. So I've been in situations where I've walked into a meeting and someone has said to me, "What are you going to teach me, little girl?" And I've been, sit tight and you're going to find out, because my pause button went off and I went, I'm going to get the best situation out of this. I'm going to not let you irritate me because I have a job to do. I'm going to get my job freaking done, whether I like you or not. Now we turned things around with that one because I didn't let him get under my skin. So, you know, you have to be prepared for that. Well, I mean, I know it. Those are actually the easier situations, because if you go in knowing, I know they're going to be an asshole, I know they're going to say something insulting, I know they're going to do that, you can prepare, what is my reaction to that going to be? How am I going to handle that? It's when people catch you off guard where it's a lot harder. So if you know you're not going to like them and you know they're going to say something inflammatory, be prepared. Know how you're going to handle that. Rehearse it.
Amazing. And how can we find you, Fotini? You
can find me on Instagram at FotiniIcon.com because I figured my last name is going to get lost.
No, it's very easy.
So at Fotini Icon on Instagram, FotiniIcon.com on my website. LinkedIn is also another great place. I post a lot of articles and stuff there. And in April, you'll find my book coming out as well. But in the meantime, follow along because I'm always sharing stuff about that. And I'm looking for feedback from my audience as well. So yeah, those are the best places to find me.
Amazing. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Yes, I found this so much when I was working in government and business. They either assumed I was assistant or aggressive like that. Yep. So it's all about building, like Fotini said, those coping mechanisms, having that pause button. I love that constant reminder, and just taking a step back. And if you can master negotiating in person, once you get on camera, you can start affecting a global audience, and that's when your business is going to start soaring. I had to throw that in there. The on-camera magic, because I'm all for all of you guys getting on camera, showcasing your genius, and just showing up, because I needed to find you to hear the message of negotiation and how to, you know, move forward. So somebody listening here might have needed the same thing, and it's just like a domino effect. So thank you so much, Fotini. I appreciate
My pleasure.
you.
Thanks for sticking to the end. I will see you same place, same time next week, right? Don't forget.